Look, it's my pleasure to introduce Olivier Girard, who is originally from France, but applying his trade in Aspetar in Qatar. And I'd also like to thank Julian for making Olivier available for this presentation this morning. Obviously, the AIS has had a huge background in altitude, and took great pleasure in flicking through the journal that Olivier's got here for people to take away. And the names on there are very familiar to me, obviously, because of our background. And it's really great that we can see the application of altitude to team sports. I think traditionally we've been more involved in the individual kind of sports, so team sports is a really interesting area. And he showed his applied nature this morning because Yuri bailed him up in the cafe and had a million questions about the use of altitude for Yuri's Paralympic squad this morning. So he's already been worded up and had sort of the interrogation from Yuri. So Olivier, thanks for coming along, and most welcome to the AIS. And would you please welcome Olivier?
So thank you, Tim, and thank you all for having me here today. Like, it's very nice to see colleagues and to make new colleagues. And I will be there for about 2 weeks, so I will be at UC Rice. So anytime you want to come and chat with me, I will be more than happy to make new friends. And yeah. All right. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about altitude training for team sport and try to focus really on what is very new in this area. So, just to set up the stage, when I was back to Switzerland, they showed me this video. So it's about 50 years back. So you can see this is in the beautiful St. Moritz resort that the Swiss team, they are preparing like this way to go to the 1968 Olympics in Mexico. So now for sure we can smile. For sure, like, things have very much changed, like the sports science support and the training habits of the athletes. But yeah, already like 50 years back, they're already thinking about, using hypoxia to get ready for the challenge. And here's the point, yes. When you look at the result at Mexico, it was very clear that the sprinters really benefited from high altitude because many new world records were set at the time. But at the opposite, there was no world record, and all the time were very, very bad, like for the middle and long distance runners. One also thing that was striking was that all the gold medalists came from a country where it was high mountains. And then maybe this is where is born this concept of altitude/hypoxic training, right? And I can see two main purposes. So the first one, obviously, is to better catch with the stress of the hypoxia when you have to compete in this stressful environment, but also to further enhance the performance when you're back home at sea level, right? Thanks to Randy Wilber, about 10 years back, he put this panorama together. So we have three big families. The first one, you all aware about this, is the live high, train high. So when you go to the mountains for several weeks, we try to increase the HB mass and then to be better when you return or you compete in this environment. The second one is the live high, train low. So here also we spend a lot of time in hypoxia, but we go down to the plane to make few sessions in order to maintain the oxygen flux and the training quality of the session. And the last family is the live low, train high. So you can live here in Canberra and then add hypoxia to few of your training sessions. So three big family. I just want to insist on one, the live high, train low. So that was first developed by Ben Levin. Ben Levin is a cardiologist, so he's a scientist. So I just want to highlight here that not only coach, of course, are very curious and propose like new training method, but also as scientists, we can also come up with some ideas and then try to implement this. And the live high, train low is the most, like this 1997 paper is the most cited one in the scientific literature with more than 800 citations. So this is quite popular. So my point is like, yeah, also as scientists, we can come and implement and work together to improve like the relation between theory and practice, right? So the purpose of my talk today is not to talk about the distance runner and the swimmers, but mainly try to focus on the team sport and try to convince you that maybe for this kind of athletes also altitude training could be beneficial. And to try to convince you, I will try to focus on really what are the latest trends and why I believe that for these athletes they can be quite useful. So this is the breakdown of my presentation of today. So yeah, new method, new application, one of them being the repeated sprint in hypoxia. I will present you the updated panorama, so updated from Randy Wilbert 10 years back with some leave low, train high methods. I will try to show you that if we combine different methods, maybe it's even better, so we can get the best of the old method and then limit the drawback of each one. And then the most exciting part, of course, is just to start to talk with you about what's next already. And then maybe we can think about some ideas for the future together, that's for sure. So yeah, in 2013, we have this conference in Doha, so it was less than 5 years, so that was kind of early days for the team sport. We had this consensus statement, and Laura, you're here today, so there's one for you, that's for sure. But I have many more, and yeah, it was many guys from the AIS, and that was very nice to have like different view from experts in the field around the world. So we put together this position statement, so it was more unresolved than resolved issue, to be honest. And most of the thing I will be presenting today has been published or is not yet published, so only 4 years back. So this is already in 2013. We have tried to update the panorama of the hypoxic method, so you still see the 3 big family. And I want to start here with the leave low, train high, with the RSH, what we call the repeated sprint in hypoxia. So what it is. So you can see that this video has been taken in 2015. So you can see that it's already implemented by top players. This is the what's called Toulon Rugby Club, which is the best club in Europe at the time. So yeah, they already believe in this kind of method. So we took the watt bike on the top, 3,000 meters in Tignes, and then they perform all-out effort repeatedly. Yeah, so that's a lot of fun, all the team together there, beautiful nature. So that was 2015. The first ever published study was published in Lausanne by Grégoire Millet's group and Raphaël Feiss as the first author. So they took 50 cyclists. They divided in 3 groups, one hypoxic group, one normoxic group, and one control group. So the 2 groups, they did 120 sprints in 8 weeks, in 8 sessions, sorry. So it's kind of short. And they tested many different things, but today I will just focus on the repeated sprint ability. So they tested before and after the 4 weeks of training. So one training session is about 15 sprints. As you can see, it's quite short, half an hour only. So what did they observe? So here on the top is the normoxic group, at the bottom is the hypoxic group. This is before the intervention. So you can see that both groups, they are able to perform 9 sprints before they reach their fatigue criteria, which is 30% of drop compared to the first sprint. So when they drop by 30%, they consider that it's task failure and they stop the exercise. So you can see that both groups, they are much before the training, they all perform 9 sprints. So what happened after the 8th training session? So you can see that in the normoxic group, they didn't perform more sprint, but the average power of the 8th sprint was higher. So if I'm a coach, still it's kind of useful, right? And what happened to the hypoxic group? You can see that the same happened, like the average power was higher, but in this group, they are able to perform 13 sprints. So they are able to postpone the fatigue before they reach this criteria score of 30% as a drop. So yeah, it looks like with this kind of training, you can postpone the fatigue. So why is that? So they check the muscle oxygenation with the near-infrared spectroscopy. They look at the total hemoglobin, and they can see that after the training, both groups, they increase the blood perfusion, but that this increase was way larger in the hypoxic group, as you can see. They also took muscle biopsy. So remind you, it's 50 subjects, so that was kind of big studies. So they observe a different signaling pathway, and then you can see that nothing much happened really for the normoxic group. But if you look at the hypoxic group, there are a lot of signaling pathways that were upregulated. So the signaling for oxygen, the oxygen carrying, and also the pH regulation, especially the MCT4. So it looks like there is a shift from the oxidative to the glycolytic activity. And this looks like it was enough to enhance more the performance in the hypoxic compared to the normoxic group. So it seems like this kind of method is like playing a role at peripheral, at the muscle level, better use of oxygen, and so on. But to be honest with you, even so the first study has been published in 2013, actually this is the first ever study on the repeated sprint in hypoxia that was performed in Qatar, still by Grégoire Millet. It was this idea from already a long time. We collected the data when I first came to Qatar in 2008. So we had, for 5 weeks, kids from the academy. So we divided the group in two, so hypoxia and normoxia, so 10 sessions. They were doing some sprinting, but also it was like a strong neuromuscular component with some change of direction, and all this in our hypoxic chamber in the Aspire Academy. So what did we observe? On the repeated agility test, we observed that the group that trained in hypoxia had a twice larger increment in the cumulative time compared to the group that trained in normoxia. So here also we confirm the superiority of this training method. Here is a meta-analysis that we put earlier this year. So you can see that we put, I think, 12 studies that were eligible at the time. It's coming from 6 different research groups. And that's quite clear that, yeah, there is an advantage of performing the repeated sprint training in hypoxia on the right compared to the normoxia. That's quite striking, right? This has been observed on different sports, different gender. So yeah, it looks like this method seems to work. But now the question is, yeah, it's good, it's working, but why is that working? We need to understand better. So yeah, from what I show you from Raphael's study, it seems like, yeah, maybe a better use of the fast twitch fiber that would be more resistant to fatigue, some specific molecular adaptation, maybe something about the vascular functions happening, or maybe a better resynthesis of the phosphocreatine. Looking at the last point, this is something that is still in press. This is something that is very practical. It's not included in meta-analysis, so just to show you that it's very popular, and then like it's a lot of publication going on this aspect for the past 4 years. So this is from the Japanese, so they conducted this training, so again, something that lasts 40 minutes, something like this, so very short with all-out efforts, so wind gate and shorter sprint for 6 days in a row. So very practical. So what did they observe? They measured the sprint times. It was not on team sport, it was on sprint runners. And they observed that only for the 0 to 10 meter interval was the performance improved, and this improvement was larger for the hypoxic group. And they put them and they measured the phosphocreatine content, and they saw at rest that it was upregulated in the hypoxic but not in the normoxic group. So maybe this is also one of the regulatory pathways, the phosphocreatine, that could explain the better performance for repeated sprinting. This is early day, you understand for sure. The first study was like already 4 years back, but as you can see, it's already implemented by many elite athletes in different sports. So that's quite encouraging, like to see that there is not a big gap between the scientific production and the application by the elite athletes. So yes, I believe that this method is quite useful to postpone the fatigue, which is probably good for the team sport to be able to better resist when the intense period of the match are coming on and so on. But what we don't really know is how to best structure this routine. I will come back to you after in the perspective for the future. Right. So this is the updated panorama. So again, we build on what we updated from Randy in 2013. So now this is the latest that we try to put together. So you can still see the leave high train high, the leave high train low. On the right, the leave low train high. So now what has been very much developed is this part là. You can see that it's way more methods. So yeah, way wider than in the past. So let's go step by step. We talk about the repeated sprint and hypoxia. So now I'm going to talk you through 3 of the methods that I believe can give a competitive edge to the athletes. So one of each is the ischemic preconditioning. So what is that? You put a cuff around the limb, and then you occlude this limb for 5 minutes, and then you release for 5 minutes, and you do that bilaterally. So this way it lasts between 30 to 40 minutes, depending on the number of cycles that you want to achieve. And 30 to 45 minutes after this intervention, then you can ask the participant to have an exercise. And for example, you can see that repeated sprint performance in the first few repetitions was better after this kind of the intervention. So always the same question, why is that? Today we don't really know. I believe this is probably very similar mechanism that for the repeated sprint hypoxia, so probably recruitment of the muscle fiber, something probably with the vascular function, the oxygen extraction with the infrared spectroscopy, but we don't really know. And to be honest with you, this is very controversial. I present one study that worked, but there are many, many that doesn't show any additional benefits, or some even show some negative finding. All right, so this is vascular occlusion. So this is localized methods. So we are thinking also, why don't we use the systemic hypoxia to do the same preconditioning, just breathing 5 minutes, some hypoxic mixture, and then 5 minutes off, and so on, and to see if it's more efficient. And what if we combine the two, the systemic and the local and the systemic hypoxia? So once again, we had for visit for our participants, we have this intervention, and after 45 minutes or so, we did the repeated sprint hypoxia exercise. And what we observe, guess, that we didn't observe anything. Yeah, we are quite disappointed. We were like, oh wow, okay. You know, what happened there? Like, you know, so is it the timing that is wrong? Like maybe, like, you know, it was, I think, 45 minutes before exercise. Maybe it's too late. Yeah, like we were kind of disappointed. Right, so we are thinking, okay, maybe we can use this vascular occlusion not only before to prepare the exercise, but maybe during the actual exercise. Let's see what happened. So we had 9 visits on this one for our participants, so quite heavy protocol. We had 4 simulated altitude, 4 occlusion, 0, 40, and 60, which is close to the maximum, and all the possible combination. So they performed the repeated sprint exercise, so 10 seconds sprint, 20 seconds rest until volitional exhaustion. So again, when they reach 30%. And what we observe this time, what is the strongest driver for performance decrement? That was quite clear. That was the occlusion. As you can see, there is an effect of altitude, of course, on the number of sprints. Of course, when you increase the altitude severity, then you perform less sprint, as expected. And the same is true, but it's way stronger with the occlusion, that you can see that when you perform only 22, when you don't have occlusion, you are only able to perform 6 when you have this occlusion. So this is really stronger stimulus, I believe, than the systemic hypoxia. Right. We are also interested in resistance exercise, so we are thinking to apply the same thing on the resistance exercise. So what we did systemic hypoxia, and then the participants were also having a cuff on the arms. And they were doing this dumbbell pull-over exercise. So 6 conditions, like no altitude, 4,000 meters, and 0, 40, and 60% of the cuff. And then we combine the two. So guess what we observed this time? Again, nothing. So yeah, what is quite clear, you can see that the number of repetition to failure was about 12 to 14, right? Using this exercise. But if you use hypoxia or if you occlude the limb, then you're still able to perform the same number. And then after, the rest was 90 seconds between the set. And then if you repeat the same, obviously there is a big fatigue, which is probably very much peripheral here. And then it's probably becoming more central towards the end. But you can see that, yeah, if you have occlusion or if you have hypoxia, then it doesn't make any effect. I have to say that, yeah, it was quite heavy loads. Like you can see 70%. And I can bet you that if it was lower load, like the effect of hypoxia will show. I'm pretty sure. I have to say also that the occlusion was only during the exercise, and then we release the cuff during the recovery. So maybe if you keep the cuff like all the way, maybe this is also showing. So yeah, early days, huh? We try, and it's research, right? And then yeah, we have some answer, and then we try to move on. So yeah, if you use local or systemic hypoxia or a combination of the two, then yeah, you didn't further alter your performance during this kind of exercise. Keeping in mind that was kind of heavy loads and kind of long recovery, right? 90 seconds. So we also measured the NIRS and EMG, but accordingly, same with the performance, we didn't see like further alteration for this performance. So that was acute study. This is one of the only chronic studies for team sport using systemic or what they call KATSU, or localized contraction. So this is this time very low contraction, 20%, 5 weeks of training for the knee extensor, knee flexor. They measure a bunch of things. And what you can see is that yeah, both the localized, so the KATSU, or the systemic hypoxia are effective to improve many markers of the neuromuscular function, so the hypertrophy and then the peak force or the endurance of force, for example. But you can see on the right that the red is producing better effects. So the red is the occlusion. So once again, the occlusion is probably a stronger stimulus, right? And you can see that all the more sport-specific markers, so all the sprinting, change of direction, you can see that that was further increased when you use the occlusion compared to the systemic hypoxia. So yeah, on the general marker, pretty much the same thing, but when you go more specific to the sport, then it seems like with the occlusion it's more beneficial. Anyhow, that's one study that was published also by colleagues from Vic Uni for 7 weeks. That was kind of high load this time, and they compared the normoxic and hypoxic hypoxia, that I think it was systemic in this instance. So they can see that after 3 weeks and even more after 6 weeks, they really improve better the performance in the hypoxic compared to the normoxic group. So yes, I think when you combine resistance exercise and hypoxia, be it systemic or even better with the occlusion, then what you will do is that you will create a larger metabolic stress at the muscle, and this is probably what will drive the better adaptation. So as of today, we don't really know what happened in the muscle. It's very much performance measure, and then we need to try to better understand if there are any regulation of all this kind of pathway for the hypertrophy and so. So the point I'm trying to make here, yes, is it's in the title there. Yes, I believe metabolic stress that you will create is the key if you want to trigger adaptation. So it's always a trade-off. Like, of course, you need to create some stress, but not too much. If not, you decrease the performance and then the stimulus by the training. So you can play on all of this to create the appropriate metabolic stress. Use a brief period between sets. If it's too long, then the effect of hypoxia will be not showing. Sufficient recovery, sufficient repetition volume. If you use very high load, as we did, like the first study, 70%, it's probably too much, and then the effect of hypoxia is not showing. But if you use load below than 50%, then yes, I believe the effect of hypoxia will kind of show. And as of today, nobody tested more severe systemic hypoxia than 12%, so which is about 4,000 meters, 4,000 meters. So maybe if we stress even more the muscle, maybe we can see something, because remember the occlusion is way stronger stimulus than the systemic. So if we use maybe a 3.5 with the systemic, it's not enough to create additional adaptations. Maybe we need to think adding a more stressful stimulus. But improving the strength is good, for sure, but at the end of the day, if you don't show any improvement in performance, as they did, then what's the point? We don't compete to have a stronger muscle, but we compete to be stronger on the field, right? So this is a question about the transfer of strength gain, right? And I will come back on this right after this. I just wanted to show you that obviously also at the mountain or maybe some chamber, you can do like some integrated work with some circuit training, looks like they really have fun when they do that, for sure. So that could be a way. Yeah, I will speed up a little bit. I think you got the picture. Yeah, so with some sledge also, different weight. This is in teens, so 2,800 meters, if I'm correct. So once again, this is Toulon, so a really top team that is, you see, really believing in this kind of method. They're already implementing this kind of training. This was in the preparation for the season. Beautiful, huh? Yeah. So here's my second take-home message. Yes, ischemic preconditioning or exercising with blood flow restriction could alter performance. So ischemic preconditioning can probably give a competitive edge. And you can see that blood flow restriction, you can really reduce the performance and probably stress better the muscle to create more adaptation. So when you use that chronically with the resistance exercise in hypoxia or with localized hypoxia, yes, you can maybe have like a larger hypertrophy strength gain, but keep in mind that you always need after to transfer this gain in the activity if you want to have this useful. And yeah, hypoxia is probably useful. You can see that's not always working, right? Like I show you many negative findings. So I think if it will work, if we are able to create the right metabolic stress. And this is why we need very good coach to understand what could be the good stimulus to give to each athlete. And then, yes, maybe only then hypoxia can be useful to create something additional. If not, maybe not. Right. Here you recognize top-level athlete sitting right in front of me. So this is back to Qatar. Yes, I was lucky to get this big grant from the Qatar National Research Foundation to fund the purchasement of this treadmill. This treadmill is unique. There are only 2 in the world like this. One of them is in Qatar. And so why is it unique? As you can see that you can perform sprinting on this treadmill. So you will tell me, yes, we also have the Woodway, for example. We can also sprint on this treadmill, right? But what makes this one unique is that because we have 4 piezoelectric sensors and we are able to record the ground reaction force for every single step in the 3 directions of the space. So not only on the vertical, but also on the horizontal or anterior-posterior force. You will tell me also with the Woodway, we also get this, but you get this at the level of the hip, which is not very correct because we produce force at the ground level, right? So that's why this treadmill is kind of unique, and this is really like very nice data. It's stiff treadmill, it's beautiful. So, again, athlete, Julian. Not sure if it's your data. So here what you can see is the force. In black, you can see the ground reaction force in the vertical in blue and horizontal in red. So you can see that they push more, obviously, at the beginning. And then as they increase, they start to break and then push, right? So what we can do, we can average this for every single step. And then you can get the peak velocity, the peak force, and the propulsive power, for example, which is the velocity times the horizontal force, so the propulsive force, which is a good marker, so 1 point for every single step. As of today, we don't know what's the effect of hypoxia on this, and this is what we thought we can be doing. So we ask maybe 12 or 13 athletes to perform 8 sprints, 5 seconds, with 25 seconds recovery in normoxia, moderate and severe hypoxia, being 1,800 and 3,600 meters for the severe condition. Here's what we observe in terms of performance. The performance can be the velocity, but here's the distance that they cover in their 5-second sprint. And you can see, as expected, that hypoxia has no effect on single sprints. So when you perform very short effort, no matter the hypoxic level, I would say, you will have always the same performance. This is what we verify. But obviously, as you repeat this, because the recovery is too short, is incomplete, then you can see that the effect of hypoxia is showing by an earlier and larger performance decrement. So this is the larger sprint decrement score from the first to the last one, or if you average the 8 sprint, you can see that in red it's lower compared to the other 2 conditions, with an effect that is very much showing for the more severe condition, but moderate and sea level it's not much different. So yeah, the performance is interesting, but yeah, with this treadmill we are able to understand what's behind, what's the biomechanical basis of the running pathway, right? So if you slow down because of worse recovery due to hypoxia, why is that, and how this is manifested biomechanically on the treadmill? So we recorded the ground reaction force. You can see our 3 conditions. On the top one is the vertical force. You can see that from the first to the last sprint, it's a very tiny change in the vertical force, like 2 to 3%, and that's not different between the conditions. So this is probably not very sensitive, right? But if you look at the second one, the horizontal force, you can see that the magnitude of the change is way larger. It's 3 times larger, and you can see that this is really much in the horizontal force that you decrease the most, like when you have the stress of hypoxia. So yeah, maybe we should better look at this kind of parameter, horizontal force production, rather than vertical force production when we start to get tired. Here, hypoxia was just used as a paradigm to create more stress, right? Obviously, all the kinetics, so more easier to measure this on the field with some pedometer, with some insoles in the shoe. So the contact time lengthened, the stride frequency slowed down, and this is even more important in the severe hypoxia. So if I was a coach, I will really target the contact time, the stride frequency, because these are the 2 markers, easy to measure, that are really sensitive to the fatigue there. Right, so the take-home that is also based on what I did before is that, yes, it's important to produce force, obviously, and then maybe hypoxia can help us to do that. But it's even more important to transmit this effectively to the ground, so in the right direction. And then when you get fatigued, so when you sprint for longer distance or when you repeat this during the match, you must be able to repeat this like effectively to keep applying the force in the right direction. So yeah, I'm on Twitter only for maybe past 1 month, Julian, but yeah, this guy was smart. Like he was saying already at the time that the chain is no stronger than its weakest link, and I think it's true. Like if you want to become top level, do you work on your weakness or on your strength? I'm a believer that you should better work on the weakness if you want to improve after. Right, this is taking me to the last part of the talk. So once again, this is the last panorama that we tried to put together. And now I will focus on this, so it can be seen as a fourth family now, like the live high, train low, and high. So what it is, this is when you use the method on the left, so when you spend some time in hypoxia, so it can be the live high, train low, but also you can combine this with some live low, train high session. So there can be the repeat sprint hypoxia, the resistance, for example. So try to combine different methods. So how we tested this, so in Qatar, 5 years back, it was still lucky days. We had some money to buy crazy equipment, and this is one of them. This is a hypoxic tent that is 45 meters long. You can put that on the swimming pool. You can put that on the football grass, as you can see there. So there is a very big compressor, and then you can sprint in the treadmill for 30 meters and slow down on the 15 meters and come back and so on. I'll show you a video after of this. So yeah, combining methods, why not for team sport? That would make a lot of sense, right? Like in team sport, of course, we need to be fast, but also we need to be endurance, to be able to be fast. If not, like you will never catch the ball when you start to be tired. So we need to get, both kind of adaptation. So why not combining the methods, right? When you spend some time in hypoxia, why is that? It's probably to increase the mass, hemoglobin mass, the maximal oxygen uptake, right? So maybe with traditional method, but also, as I tried to show you, with the new method, the repeat sprint in hypoxia or the resistance training in hypoxia, it's probably targeting different things and something more in the muscle. So maybe why don't we try the two together and then try to get the best of it, and then maybe it's even better than each method alone, right? So we tried to validate this concept by having 3 groups. So one control group, so they were living low and training low. So there was no additional sprint for this group. And then we had 2 intervention groups. The 2 intervention groups, they were living high and training low, right? And they're adding some sprinting session. One group doing the sprint in normoxia and the other group in hypoxia, right? So the 2 intervention groups, they sleep high, train low, classic. They had additional sprinting, one group in normoxia, one group in hypoxia. So we had the lead-in period. After we tested the team, so it was field hockey players from Belgium, so one of the best team, if not the best team of the league there. They came to Qatar for 2 weeks. Then we posted them after 1 week and 3 weeks after the camp in Qatar. So we had this live low, train low group, so our control group, right? And we got our 2 intervention groups. So once again, the 2 groups, they benefited for prolonged exposure to hypoxia in the chamber that we had back to Qatar. So they accumulated over 200 hours in these 14 days. And then they also, of course, play the sport, right? And then they have 6 sessions over the 2 weeks of repeated sprinting. So one session was 20 sprint divided in 4 sets. So one set being 5-second sprint 5 times with 25 recovery and 5 minutes in between the set. So again, 120 sprints over the duration of the intervention. So you can see here the marquee, so 45 meters long. So I'll show you one video now that's becoming more clear. So you can see that you can really sprint in the very ecologic situation there, like if you want with your soccer boots, no problem. So it's 45 meters, so you can really sprint here for 5 seconds and then slow down. So you can have 6 athletes training at the same time in the tent. They go every 5 seconds, and then after that, they will go back from the other side. So 5 times, and then after they will rest 5 minutes, and then they will repeat this 4 times in total. Okay, so what did we observe? So in blue is always the control group. So as you can see, from pre to 1 week and 3 weeks after the intervention, there was no change in this group. Good news, as expected. And you can see that in our 2 intervention group that, again, spend more than 200 hours in the room, they both increased the hemoglobin mass by 3 to 4%. And the interesting thing was that it was preserved 3 weeks after. So it was the same kind of improvement 3 weeks after. But the same thing in the 2 groups, no matter they did the sprint and hypoxia or normoxia. We measure the performance, so the yo-yo test, classic. Again, in blue, no change. And you can see that there was big change from pre to post, and then again, even more increase 3 weeks after the camp. But no difference between the 2 groups. So no matter if they did the sprint in hypoxia or normoxia, they will have same kind of improvement. That's kind of a big improvement. I have to say that was in season, because in the field hockey, the season is split in two, so they have 2 months break. So the study was conducted during this 2 months break. So maybe they are getting unfit, and that's why we can see such big improvement, right? We did repeated sprinting, so 8 times 20 meters with 25 seconds of recovery. So once again, in blue, no change in the cumulative time. From pre to post, the 2 intervention group increased, but the increment was twice larger in the group that did the sprint in hypoxia compared to the group that did the sprint in normoxia. And the more even interesting thing is that 3 weeks after, the group that did the sprint in normoxia came back to the same level, but the group that did the sprint in hypoxia maintained the gain in terms of repeated sprint ability. So not only you increase twice larger if you do this kind of training, but also you're able to maintain for 3 weeks. Whereas if you do the same thing, but in normoxia, then yes, it's a good training effect, obviously, but then it's back to normal after 3 weeks. So why is that? We are lucky to be able to collect muscle biopsy on this. Some of them have been Olympic medalists, so that was a long discussion to be able to get biopsy on these players, but we managed to do so. So this is here the normoxic group. Not to confuse you, this is changed from pre to post, and this is changed from pre to 3 weeks. Okay, this is only the group that live high and did the sprint in normoxia. So you can see that for most of the parameters, yes, it seems useful. It's kind of upregulated for many of the signaling pathway that we are looking at. But if you look at the hypoxic group, especially from pre to post, so the dark green, you can see that especially in the oxygen signaling, the PGC1 alpha, so the mitochondrial biogenesis, and also the endothelial function, for example, at the bottom, you can see that was very much upregulated compared to the group that did the same training again in normoxia. So they sleep both in altitude, they did the same training content, same training load, only the sprinting was did in hypoxia, and you can see that there is upregulation of many of the markers that we measure. So probably that could be one of the explanations why we get better. But if you remember, 3 weeks after, they are still better. And if you look at them, many of the parameters came back to what it was before. So probably it's not enough to explain the whole story. So yeah, maybe you have part of the puzzle, but yeah, probably some other kind of adaptation are also playing a role here, obviously. So again, some biomechanics. Also, before and after the camp, we also assess the players on the treadmill. So we propose them this 30-30, so high-intensity interval training. What we observe is that from the first to the 6th repetition, there are some change to be able to maintain the speed. The speed was about 20 km an hour, individualized for each athlete. But that was not different between the groups. So the way they strike the ground, it was not changed due to the training intervention that we propose. So my fourth take-home message, yes, altitude training is exciting field for sure. It started 50 years ago, but now we can see kind of acceleration and development of a lot of new methods that are fitting the need, I believe, to the team sport athletes. And yeah, why not combining the methods, the classical method with the new methods to try to get both the central and the peripheral adaptation, and maybe try to make our athletes better. So yeah, maybe this is something that we need to consider. But the question that remains now is how we best combine these different innovative methods, and this we don't really know, and this is where we need to do more work at the moment. So just to finish, I'd like to show you this few slides for the ideas for the future. This is something that we put, I think, last year in the book chapter for the different methods, some recommendation about minimal, optimal dose, and so on for what kind of activity. And when I was looking at this already yesterday, when I prepared this, I was thinking oh wow, already something. I don't really agree with what we put already a year back. Maybe you don't also for different methods, but if you look the sprint in hypoxia, for example, yeah, I would really much challenge this thing, and I'll show you why. As I say, we put this systematic review, so 12 studies from 6 different research groups, and if you look at the 12 studies, all studies have been performed at a simulated altitude of 3,000 meters, all studies. Why is that? Maybe the first one proposed this and everybody's replicating, or maybe because, if you have too high altitude, then you stress good the muscle, but then you don't recover enough, and then you lose the training quality. Maybe if you go lower, then you don't have enough stimulation, so maybe that's why everybody is choosing this range. Yes, it's true. When you increase altitude severity, as we discussed before, of course, the performance is decreasing. So you need to be careful not to have too strong stimulus, right? If not, you will decrease too much the performance and then the stimulus during training, and then actually, the hypoxia will not be very much useful if you don't stimulate enough your athlete. But at the same time, even so, you cover less distance. So you have worse performance as you increase hypoxia severity. The good thing is that you create more disturbance in your muscle. This is the peak twitch force, so index of muscle contractility. And you can see that there are larger decrements in muscle contractility as you increase hypoxia severity, despite the fact that they cover less distance. So that's interesting. And this is where we're thinking, oh, wow, why don't we use very severe hypoxia exposure during the actual sprinting, the actual training, to really try to increase the metabolic disturbance and push the muscle to further adapt. But yes, by doing so, we need to be careful, because if you don't give the opportunity to your athletes to recover properly, then you will decrease the training quality. So what we are thinking is that, okay, we can really go high during the sprinting, but then during the recovery, they will do that in normoxia, so that they recover well and that they're ready to really keep the training quality during the successive sprinting. So this is something that we tried last week, actually, with the French rugby girl in preparation for Dubai, Rugby 7. So we also included new measurements. So this is a measure of the vascular function with the flow-mediated dilation. So this is something that nobody has explored so far. This is one of the possibilities. So obviously, we did a bunch of testing, testing the peak velocity with acceleration profile. So this is showing there. Maybe I can speed up a little bit this one. And so yo-yo test, classic. They also had the biomechanical evaluation at Aspire Academy. So this is the treadmill. So where we can track the way you hit the ground, and with fatigue, if you're still efficient at producing force in the right direction. And this is some picture of the training. So yeah, we had half of the squad. They did the sprint in normoxia and the recovery in normoxia, right? And half of the team, they did the sprinting at 5,000 meters. So it's kind of stressful. But after the sprinting, so after the block of 5 sprints, they are coming out for 4 minutes in normoxia to recover, and then in again for the second set. So which was only 2.5 minutes of exercise, and out for 4 minutes, and so on. So it was the same model, 20 sprints, 4 sets of 5 sprints every time. So yeah, we have 2 hypoxic chambers back to each other. So that's the idea. They come in for the sprinting, out for the recovery, right? And so on. Don't have the result yet because they played last week, so it's in the box. But yeah, I will be more than happy to share this with you. Yeah, one more thing maybe before I wrap up is this. We try with a subgroup, the one that we're not playing in Dubai. Also, why don't we try the same idea? Try to play with different methods and try to create the best metabolic stress in the muscle. Try to combine in the same session the hypoxia and the heat stress, right? So we collected the power data, so you can see that they are from the first to the second, after no much change between 3 and 4, decrease in the power. And this is the perceptual response, so the RPE for the overall dyspnea, the leg, also the thermal scale, thermal comfort, SpO2. So you can see that overall, this is what we can expect, and this is really much tolerated. This is 3035 degrees. That was one-off session. So obviously now, and this is why I'm here, because we'll work with Julien to set up a study where we will focus on the heat. So no hypoxia this time, to really on the chronic, and something that's very practical, again, something that is 9 days, so something that will be easy to implement with the athletes. So yeah, we need to better understand the heat part before we maybe play with combining the two and so on. But that was maybe just to see if it could work, and yes, it can. So that's my last slide. Yeah, we talk about elite sport. Yes, seems like hypoxia can potentially be useful for elite sport, but to me, this is very small part. You know, this is what we discussed with Tim this morning. This is very small part. I think the future, this is the therapeutic use of hypoxia, or what we can call hypoxic conditioning. There are early signs showing that yes, if you do hypoxic training in a chamber or this in the natural environment, looks like you can help to normalize the blood pressure of your patient. You can ameliorate the biomarkers of the blood. For the rehab, you can obviously try to reduce the mechanical loading while keeping the metabolic stimulation. You can, this is published evidence, but in the past 2 years only, so it's very recent, it's coming. Maybe obesity, to lose more weight, because it's working on the satiety and on the leptin and ghrelin enzyme. Also, when we work with all the population, also to try to better preserve their strength and the cognitive functions with hypoxia. So many ideas for the future. So yeah, of course, we are here to work with the athletes, but I think like there's a big potential for the future. And to be honest, like I guess this is where the future is going, right? So 43 minutes. I think I'm perfect in timing to what you gave me. So I'd like to really thank you for the attention. And as I say, I'm there for 10 days. So like, I'm more than happy to catch up anytime. And thank you for your attention.
Any questions or comments for Olivier?
Thanks, Olivier. Fantastic presentation. Just had a quick question, I guess, around the repeated sprint protocol. I guess if the desire is to kind of increase the stress with the actual exercise, do you think potentially reducing the rest period could potentially, augment that stress, or do you think that would kind of compromise the training quality throughout that? And do you think maybe
that's perfectly fine. That's for sure. Like. For the resistance training, this is what I suggested, that you can play obviously with the duration of the rest to try to increase the metabolic stress, but also you can do that with the hypoxia. Maybe you can keep 3,000 meters, maybe you don't need to go that high, 5,000, you can stay in the room, but then you just play with the duration of the sprint and the walk to rest ratio, and this way you manage the metabolic stress. Obviously, there can be also a way to do so, that's for sure. Yeah. But this is where we are up to now, and then we don't really know how to do that. And obviously, it will depend on your athletes. It depends what you want to target, more oxidative or glycolytic adaptation. So we need to try different walk-to-rest ratio with different hypoxia and try to better understand. But that's definitely one of the drivers, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yep, Simon.
Just a quick thought that's come to mind after a great presentation. Thanks very much. Just as someone that's been in a few studies with Lauren and used a bit of altitude as an athlete myself, do you ever look into like the progressive overload? So we obviously don't see a lot of published studies over 3,000 meters, but do you sort of see any potential to start athletes, no matter the sport, but at the lower altitudes and sort of in a week by week progress the altitude throughout the adaptation? So like the 3,000 becomes a little easier towards the last week, or it needs to be a little further.
Point.
Like, does that come up at all?
I think we got this discussion many times for the heat stress. Obviously, like you really adapt quickly, and so like, do you keep the same stress? Then it's less stressful for the body, or do you increase this stress so that the body is keep adapting? And it's the same thing. So obviously, when you sleep in the DOMS, I guess that they check your saturation and the questionnaire, and then you catch up well. Then probably they increase, like it's what you do also,
Quality of sleep is always hard the first few nights at 3,000, whether you start lower, so that you get your sleep quality still high in the first few nights, then go to 3,000.
Yeah.
Just get there anyway.
I mean, the right thing to do, it will be to base the training on your saturation, because obviously if you go in the chamber at 3,000 meters, maybe you will, like the girls, like you will get 3,000, like before the sprint, 92, then after the sprint, 87, so you can be in this range. But this is average, I can bet you that some girls, they are like 95 here, some they are like 80, so I think the best way to do that, it will be to base on the saturation, to really have the same stress for everyone. So you can do that with Alti Trainer when you can claim the saturation, but good luck to do that with the chamber for now, like, you know, and the practicality is that we can have many athletes training together in the chamber, so that's difficult, but it's a good point, yeah, like, as a scientist, yeah, obviously you want to rationalize and have the same stress for everyone, but yeah.
Thanks, Olivier. A bit of a long question, but I think you'll be able to follow. So you mentioned that this probably works for team sport athletes because they are the perfect combination of needing aerobic fitness and anaerobic qualities. Another sport that would require that is middle distance, so middle distance swimming, running and stuff like that. And so here you've got sort of a repeat sprint protocol. We've got sort of a 1-to-5 work-rest ratio where the work efforts are like 5 seconds, which is quite applicable to the sport because they need to sprint in that. Say for middle distance running, that's probably not as applicable, but sort of I think similar concepts can be applied. And so like Raphael's study showed increased glycolytic pathways. I think it was really beneficial for say an 800 meter runner.
It was 1-2.
And so I think we, similar to you, think that live high, train low plus high is the best way to go, especially with a lot more train high than you'd probably think reading the literature, which seems to be predominantly live high, train low for endurance sports. And so I was thinking, like, just thinking about some of the sessions that we do in Flagstaff, like 2,000 meters plus, like, do you think, so say it's like a 1-to-3 work rest ratio where the work interval is say 25 seconds, but it's probably only at 120 to 130% of VVO2. Like, do you think a session like that would be enough to create the stimulus, or is it really like a sprinting thing? Because as I said, like for us doing sprints, it's probably just doing a few sprints for more of a biomechanical thing at the end of a gym session. But these sort of race pace sessions are something that are done quite frequently. But then if you read the literature, people like Ben Levine would say, oh no, you've got to do that session like train low, but we actually think it's train high. We just don't have the molecular evidence to support that. Because again, going back to the literature, look at intermittent hypoxic training, stuff at like 90% to 100% VO2 doesn't seem very good. But then repeat sprint and hypoxia, like 200+% of VO2, that seems awesome. I'm just wondering that stuff so specific to sort of that middle distance race pace, is that enough of a stimulus, would you think? I know it's a pretty speculative question, but...
Yeah, no, it's a good comment, thank you. Yeah, I think the problem with IHT is that the training intensity is lower, so at the end of the day, you know, like it's the same, so that's why you don't see further improvement. I guess most of the study is that. So with the all-out effort, like this is all-out, so that's why you create more adaptation because you create more stress on your body. So yeah, team sports, 1-5, the ratio worked well. Raphael, he was working with cyclists, it was 1-2, 10 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And if you look at the muscle biopsy data, it's quite different. And some points, for example, if you look at the mitochondrial biogenesis, like the PGS1 alpha or the TFAM, we saw some upregulation, but Raphael, he shows some downregulation, you know, so it's kind of opposite result. Is it because it's a different ratio? Is it because it's different population? Yeah, maybe a bit of all. After to come back on your question, yeah, I mean, like the Japanese guy, like they use like all-out Wingate testing, and they seems to show that the phosphocreatine content is very much improved. After I don't have clear answer, to be honest. I don't see why it will not work.
I just think for like the IHT, the main adaptation you're going for with aerobic style training, like 100% VO2, is an aerobic adaptation. So you would never do that session in hypoxia if you could go lower. But when it comes to race pace stuff, like the adaptations you're going for are going to be driven anaerobically. So I think it's beneficial to stay high, but we think that it's quite beneficial to do that sort of training. But whether or not that's optimal or not, we can't say. Is there a better way? Is the intensity high enough? Like, should we be going for 200 meter intervals on like, so if they run them in 25 seconds, should we give them 3 minutes rest in between and like make them all out efforts essentially, or keep it sort of as somewhat of a conditioning session as well? We don't know.
Yeah, I don't really know. Like now, our colleague Nathan Townsend, he was also trying this live high, train low and high, and the train high session was based on the RP, but that was quite low. It was RP 13 running for 1 hour, just continuous. You know, so maybe, as you say, maybe it's better to do something higher and then play with the recovery and try to get the right stress. But yeah, I mean that could be a good way to continue this for sure. Like they are like also target athletes for this kind of method, but for sure, you know. They rely on both, so obviously.
Any other questions or comments? If not, would you think Olivier mentioned that he's going to be around for
till the 18th or 15th or the 17th or something.
17th of December. He doesn't know. It's going to be for a while. So if you have any more questions, Olivier's going to be around for a while. Would you thank him again for his presentation?
Thank you.